We're live.
All right. Good morning and welcome to the Committee on the Revision of the Penal Code. I'll wait a few minutes to make sure that our public room gets populated before we get started. It just takes a second or two. All right. Good morning. I'm Mike Romano, Chair of the Committee on the Revision of the Penal Code, which is now in session for our first meeting of 2022. The principal objective of today's meeting is to set a research and meeting agenda for the coming year. I'm so happy to see all of you. Before we begin, however, I wanted to make a quick note that Professor Ochin has left the committee due to a conflict with a new position that she has as special advisor to Attorney General Bonta. I think we all agree that she was a great asset to the committee and will be equally valuable to the AG. I think that she kept our committee and our witnesses honest and focused on some of our most important and difficult issues we faced. And she asked me to wish you all well and promised to keep in close touch as an additional connection between the committee and the AG's office. So she'll be missed, and we will be, I've been already speaking with the governor's office about finding a replacement. With that said, I'd like to just make a quick roll call in alphabetical order. Judge Espinoza.
I'm here.
Judge Henderson.
Here.
Assemblymember Lee.
Here.
Justice Moreno.
Here.
Senator Skinner.
Here.
Great. As I mentioned, today's meeting will be brief. Our main item of business is approving a tentative agenda for a committee's study for this coming year. We'll also have brief updates on other committee business and hear public comment. I'm going to start with the brief administrative matters. First is I'd like to approve the minutes from our November 16th, 2021 meeting. Will someone second approving the minutes?
Second.
Any opposed? All right, so those minutes are approved. Next, I wanted to let everybody know that the committee is in the final stages of hiring a senior attorney, and we hope to conclude that process very soon, bring somebody aboard, and we'll make an announcement about that. We had a number of excellent candidates, and I think we're all excited to have more staff on board. Speaking of more staff, we've also been budgeted for another more junior attorney, which would be our fourth full-time attorney for the committee. That hiring process has not yet begun, but I'll keep you posted. Finally, I wanted to note that generous funding for the committee's research with the California Policy Lab, this is our empirical data research, has been included in the governor's January budget. So, of course, I want to thank the governor and his team for including this funding in the budget. And I look forward to working with the administration, the legislature, and of course, California Policy Lab as it makes its way through the legislative process. California Policy Lab they've been incredible partners, and this is I think great for the committee. Next, I want to briefly update you all on our report that was approved in November and released to the governor, legislature, and public in December. This has our recommendations for this current legislative cycle. As you remember, the report contains 7 recommendations and additional information from some of our recommendations from 2020 that had not yet been enacted. We're working to find with lawmakers and sponsors and allies and others for these recommendations. And I look forward to those moving through the legislative process. Again, I'll keep you posted. All right. With all that said, I want to come to the main item of our agenda, which is a brief presentation from Tom about the proposed topics for the committee for this coming year. You'll see that we propose that we follow the overall schedule that we've basically followed for the past 2 years, which means meeting roughly every other month and aiming to release our annual report in December. We hope to hold our first substantive meeting late next month. Once we hear the proposals from Tom, we'll hear public comment and decide if there's any changes that need to be made to the agenda. But I do want to emphasize that this agenda is tentative and remains open to us to change along the way. It's basically to give us some sort of roadmap moving forward, especially for committee staff who will begin to research the topics. With that said, Tom, can you please take it away? And for the rest of you, I hope you'll chime in with any questions or suggestions along the way.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Great to see everybody here as we get started this year. So this is just a couple of slides that might be helpful as we think about the work for the year ahead. So as Mike said, the plan is to sort of do what we've done the last 2 years roughly, which is to have, 2-day meetings every other month starting next month. And that meeting is actually on February 23rd and 24th. And then aim to have the report out in mid-December like we did last year. So that's just sort of what that would look like. Obviously, this will be subject to you all's, scheduling constraints and things like that. And we'll continue to work closely with you all to get everybody there for as much of the meetings as possible. So, we've been speaking with lots of stakeholders and Mike, of course, to sort of come up with some proposed topics for study. So I've put them, all 5 of them here, and I can just walk through very briefly some of the specifics about them, answer any questions, or see if anybody has any other concerns or things we might like to add to this. So the first one is, what we can think of as crime victims and how we center crime victims' needs more in the system. And this would include things like, hearing directly from crime victims and crime victims group about what crime victims want, including the current system for compensation for victims that's set up in California, restitution orders and how those work in practice and their effectiveness. And we've also been, sort of not thought as necessarily a traditional crime victim, but obviously retail theft has been in the news and continues to be in the news. And we had a very productive meeting with the California Retailers Association, and we hope to include their perspective as well as sort of representing employees and folks who go to stores where some of these incidents happen. And I think we're also going to look at restorative justice here, which we looked at 2 years ago, but this is going to be from this was an idea that was brought to us by the Yolo County DA, Jeff Reisig, who's also the current president of CDAA, the California District Attorneys Association. And it's sort of restorative justice from that perspective and from a victim's perspective as well, to add to sort of when we last looked at this idea. So that's a little bit of what we're hoping to do at the meeting next month. The next topic is mental health. Again, obviously, this is something that we're going to, I think, keep returning to in different ways as long as the committee is around. But we were thinking of doing this time is sort of mental health beyond diversion and sort of more of some of the core ways that the penal code engages with this issue. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about competency to stand trial, not guilty by reason of insanity, which are these very expensive systems that I think are antiquated in many ways and maybe don't necessarily fit the need of the system as it is now, where it's a system of overwhelming guilty pleas and things like that. And I think we can also explore a little bit the experience of people with mental health issues in prison as well, which is sort of going to be related to the competency and the NGI issue. So that's what we're hoping to do for our mental health focus this year. Obviously, it's a very complex and complicated topic. That's the way of saying complex in different ways. And we hope to dive into it and try to bring something new to the table. The third topic we have here is what, our sort of shorthand for it is what we call first contact with the system. So this would sort of go from sort of the first hours almost, where someone has an encounter with law enforcement, is arrested, and is brought to an incarceral setting. So this would include looking at law enforcement stops, police officers stopping vehicles. There's very rich data on this in California from the RIPA board, the Racial Identity and Profiling Act board, that has just very rich data on it. And the co-chair of that board is actually Professor Raphael, who works with us at the California Policy Lab, so there's a natural affinity there. And I think a focus there will be on racial disparities and who's stopped and the outcome of those stops. This is a sort of well-known problem that there's been data on for many years, but we now have an opportunity to really look at it from the California perspective. Along with this first contact, I think we'll also look at law enforcement assisted diversion, which is when law enforcement officer is the one who sort of starts the diversion process from the moment they encounter someone. We also hope to look at probable cause determinations after arrest, especially in the juvenile context. There is some statutes in California that don't conform with the constitutional standard here, and we hope to sort of survey defenders around the state to sort of see how that issue is playing out. And we want to look at, assignment of counsel, especially in less urban settings where, they don't necessarily have an institutional defender with folks available around the clock. So there's a lot to dig in here. I could go on, but I'll stop. And after that, I think we also want to look at, this is the fourth bullet here, prosecutorial discretion, plea bargaining, and common dispositions. So this is a topic where we really want to dive deep into the data that we have about what are the sort of the most common dispositions across the state, and see if there are disparities based on gender, youth, age, and geography, and race, of course, and sort of dive into the process of how prosecutors arrive at decisions to charge people, the plea bargaining process. And I think we can also look at juvenile transfers here, the power of judges to reduce charges under Penal Code Section 17B, which lets some felonies be reduced to misdemeanors and misdemeanors be reduced to infractions in some scenarios. We can look at specific defenses, particularly those that might be most relevant for certain groups like women in a domestic violence situation. Do they have the full range of reasonable defenses available? And we also might look at what is sometimes called overcharging, where a prosecutor may only have one very harsh option to pursue for certain types of conduct. So we sort of want to do a dive into the sort of the way this case processing in the system a little bit, and the way those resolution happen. So again, a very big topic. That's why we're scheduling it for the end of the year, hopefully, to give us time to really think about it. And then finally, I think that the time has come for us to look at bail. Obviously, this is an issue that when the committee was formed, the landscape was very unsettled, I think, in the last few years with the sort of resolution of SB 10 and the Humphrey decision from the California Supreme Court. There's sort of sufficient stability for the committee to, try to dig into what's happening with these pretrial issues in the state right now, and is really, I think, would help fulfill the core mission of the committee to look at this, very complicated, very important, very huge in scope part of the penal code that has had so much activity recently and has so much interest on it. And hopefully we can bring some helpful perspective to bear on that. And I hate to end on a down note, but I think one caveat with this topic is I think for us to be most effective in speaking about bail, we really want to have recent data, especially, what has happened after the Humphrey decision in the California Supreme Court, which, has the potential to be a watershed decision, not something you hear often in the criminal justice area. But getting the data here is going to be challenging. There's some strategies we have and some people who do have data that we're going to work very hard to get. But I just wanted to flag that this one, I think, is going to be very dependent on the data on our effectiveness. Okay, so that's sort of how we would sort of the broad categories and some of the specifics for the 5 meetings we would have coming up this year. As Mike said, this is not set in stone, and of course we'll be responsive to concerns we hear from any of you all or other stakeholders that we're engaging with. And I just also wanted to mention some other work that staff will be doing, and Mike too, as the year goes on. We have these new and ongoing research relationships with some just the best institutions in the state for this kind of stuff, I believe. We spoke about the California Policy Lab already. We're working very closely with staff there, meeting regularly, and really trying to figure out a research agenda to produce reports that are sort of going to support those topics I just mentioned, and also offer more just basic information about the way the system is working in the state. So very excited about that relationship. We're also going to work this year with some students from the UC Berkeley Goldman School to look into instruments that are used to predict dangerousness that I think is an issue that's come up for us in the parole context, may come up in the bail context a little bit, but it's something that I think would be good for us to develop sort of a base of knowledge on. And of course, we continue our relationship with Mike and his team at Stanford Law School. And we are just looking forward to working with all those folks and keep it going this year. So that are my slides. I'm happy to go back, answer any questions.
Yeah.
But,
Tom, will you hold this slide for a second?
oh, yeah, sure. I'll bring it back.
So yeah, I was curious if people had thoughts, additions, subtractions, comments on these 5 bullets.
Yeah. I do, Mike. I mean, I think number 1, number 2, and number 3 are sufficiently specific or discrete to really deal with those. But I think on the first contact with the system and prosecutorial discretion, we may be overly ambitious. I mean, there's just the descriptions are kind of general. So I think we need a lot of fine tuning. But either one of those, the first contact with the system or prosecutorial discretion, I can see that there's just a lot of subtopics in there that will have to be fine-tuned. Whereas with the others, I think, we can pretty much look at penal code provisions that kind of address each of those things. And even with respect to first contact with the system, when you talk about profiling, I think there's some, legislation on that, but that's just, when I first saw that, I thought, okay, first contact with the system, I was thinking public defender qualification and everything else at the beginning of the court system. I didn't really think about, the constitutional aspects of police stops and so forth. So I think that's going to need a lot of fine tuning if we want to get to the point where we can make specific recommendations. Same thing with prosecutorial discretion, plea bargaining, common dispositions. Again, that has to be really fine-tuned. And I know that Tom, read off a number of subtopics. So I would just urge that when we do set this plan in motion, that we not be overly ambitious and too generalized, that our recommendations are not going to be sufficiently pinpointed and related to the penal code. So that's my only comment. But otherwise, I think it's a good step forward for the new year.
So Justice Marino, I share your reservation. In some respects, we wanted to, for at least today's purposes, have relatively large umbrellas, because what staff does is they'll go out and speak to a lot of stakeholders in these general areas from around the country, really, and pick a handful of ideas that fit within that umbrella that don't cover the whole landscape. And I think that we'll have the same model as we've had in the past with our staff memos that say, here are, a handful of ideas, and we'll have witnesses that go along with those ideas. I agree that, plea bargaining is massive and policing is massive, but partially these are ones that have gone, will be later on in the year, so we'll have more time. In the interim, what we're hoping is not just for staff, but for committee members, just to have these ideas in mind. And when you see issues or read about them that might fit into one of these umbrellas or another, these are meetings that we're going to have in, August and, over the summer, that you can forward them to me or to staff so that we can address them. But there are areas that we don't think get a ton of attention and that need some attention. And especially with the 4th bullet, I think we're going to be very dependent upon what the data reveal and go for there. But I do hear that these are broad. I mean, victims' rights also is hugely broad, but we will keep, listen, we want to make, at the end of the day, the December recommendations to be very solid, discrete recommendations. And I think that we hope to come up with, on average, 2 or 3 ideas out of after each of these meetings. Right, but I think your point is well taken. Any other thoughts? Senator?
Thanks, Mike. I have a number of them. First, on victims' rights, I'd like to add I'd like us to hear some about exonerees. Because while the statutes related to victims' compensation doesn't fully cover exonerees, it has some relationship to, and I've been hearing from more exonerees that the process to get any compensation for their wrongful conviction or the circumstance or the time they served is very, very difficult. And I would like to, understand that a little better. And I think that should be considered part of that discussion. The other thing I'd be interested in, and this may just be the research that we do, is if there is what type of research that would indicate that supporting victims or providing support to victims, whether that improves cooperation with law enforcement. Because my understanding now is that there in our statutes related to supporting victims, it requires some levels of law enforcement cooperation, or at least if the victim is dinged if there's not been some, if there's perceived to be a lack of cooperation with law enforcement. And I wondered if there's research that indicates that support for the victim might encourage that. And I don't know if there is, but I would be interested in seeing some information about that. Because if we're going to talk about victims' rights, and I want to fully understand the full picture on the benefits or pros and cons of the state playing a role in supporting victims. Then a couple of other topics that, well, on the mental health, while we're talking, beyond diversion, and I don't know quite how to articulate what the topic should be, but rather we know from our past discussions on this that we have a large percent of people in our state facilities, state prison facilities, and our jails that have mental health, serious, significant mental health issues, and had them even prior to their incarceration. And so what there's commonly referred to is that, in effect, we are using our carceral facilities as a depository for people with mental illness. And while we touched on that a little, I think that we might want to delve into a little more of understanding that, because I think clearly they're not appropriate settings for that, and how the penal code may interact with contributing to that, I think would be good for us to understand, because it's not a benefit to either our carceral systems. They don't benefit from being the depository for people with mentally ill, and mentally ill people don't either. So would like, again, not sure how quite to characterize it as an agenda item. And then two others, apologies for taking up, but I do have two other issues. And the other one is sentencing on women. Now, I know that under the law, we cannot, we can't treat a criminal differently due to their gender. However, I would like to see some data on what I've noticed in looking at our data regarding the prison population is that the number of women in prison has percent of total population has been on the rise. And I wonder what categories of crime, what is the dominant categories of crime that the women who are in prison and whether there are things within the penal code that are not factoring conditions that may be unique too. So I'll raise, for example, the legislature has now put into statute that the courts need to look through racial bias lens in certain of our sentencing and others. But I wonder, and again, these are the whole issue of treating genders differently is difficult. However, there appears to be a certain amount of the crimes for which the women are sentenced for, where through one lens, it may be viewed that they were not free agents. So, now we talk about human trafficking. And so we now understand, for example, that, some, especially women, younger women who engaged in prostitution were, recruited, groomed, and in effect, it's like being held in servitude and versus being free agents for that. And I don't know whether there's, again, anything within the, penal code that we would need to adjust to factor for that, but I think it is worth us looking at. So women. And then my last subject is the definition, maybe not definition, how we approach people in a certain age group. So we have a definition of juvenile. The legislature has now, and the administration has now changed how we are approaching the sentencing and the treatment, the approach to people who get into our system who are, under the 18 and below. But there's been a lot of discussion around this notion of raise the age, and that the brain chemistry, that a person is not, fully, their brain development and their impulse control is different up until age, say, 24, 25. And so there's been a lot of discussion around whether there should be we should be treating certain age group differently. And it hasn't, the changes so far have mostly been to just what we consider the juvenile justice system, but I don't know whether it's worth it for us to delve into that some, because there's been a lot of talk, again, amongst probation officers, amongst the courts, juvenile advocates, many others around these subjects. So I wanted to put it in the mix.
So I think that those are all really interesting and in some ways already incorporated in some of our thinking that perhaps Tom, didn't get into. So let me just address each one quickly. We haven't really talked about the question of wrongful convictions in general. We haven't touched that issue at all. It's obviously a super important one. I think one of the reasons why we've not touched on it is because we feel, or I feel, relatively affects a smaller number of people. Of course, that's an incredible tragedy and miscarriage of justice. So I do think it's worth thinking about the ways that we can be most helpful. One of the ways that I've thought about, we could talk about wrongful conviction, and aside from the compensation, I didn't realize it was related to the victim's compensation, is a number of at least news stories that I've been seeing in other states about banning police from lying to suspects during interrogations as a way to reduce wrongful convictions. So I would sort of put that as a possible issue to discuss during the first contact with the system.
Well, let me just, what I threw in exonerees because I think it is worth it to view them. They are an effective victim. So I wanted to throw them in the context of, if we're thinking about victims' rights, that we consider them a victim also.
And yes, and I think it's especially makes sense if they are indeed tied to the victim's compensation pot of money. That makes a ton of sense to me too. The The cooperation with police issue, I think that that is also super important. Something that you didn't mention, but I think a lot of people that's related are immigration consequences that people have concerns about when cooperating with police. I think that we could think about that and see how that's going on in other states. So I think that that would fit into the first contact with the system issue. Mental health beyond diversion. I think this needs some more thought. We have every year talked about mental health issues, and I think that we all appreciate that the intersection between the criminal legal system and the mental health system is an enormous Gordian knot, and that the traditional mental health structures that we have in the state are not prepared to handle folks who are also in the justice system, who may have committed crimes. And likewise, the jails and prisons are not adequately positioned to treat people who are mentally ill. We've over and over and over again said, and this is, sort of the solution nationwide has been diversion, diversion, diversion. And we've said that, and we've made some, I think, headway on that. And we have some recommendations for this coming, legislative cycle. My concern has been that feels a little bit like it hasn't worked, whether it's because there's no place to divert people to, or the statutes that encourage people to be sentenced to diversion aren't adequate. That's something that we're trying to address, but that's a little bit superficial. So I think we need to think of bigger or differently than just diversion, is what I would say. And part of that is the competency and incompetent and not guilty by reason of insanity, but can go, many different directions. So I think we need some more thought about that. The question, and then the last two, and I see your hand up, Judge Espinoza, about the issue related to women and younger people. I think that will reveal itself in what we're calling the prosecutorial discretion and common dispositions issue, when we really look at the data and see where the disparities are. And I think that will really lift up those concerns, or may not, or may dash them and may say, like, actually, this isn't as much of an issue as we had thought. But I think that this really deserves a ton of data research that we're, going to look at. So I don't know. Those are my thinkings on what you said. I think that they can easily. The bottom line is, I think they can easily fit, and they should fit within what we're already discussing. First, Judge Espinoza, and then Assemblymember Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to, in the context of first contact with the system, lift up some of the strategies that are being developed around the state for diverting people at the point of law enforcement contact, prior to arrest, prior to booking, both with people who suffer from mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and all of the things that bring people into the system. That's all I had to say.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And it also, of course, touches on the homelessness crisis that, the state is suffering with. So I'd really like to learn more about that as well, and how we might be able to help. Assemblymember Lee.
Yeah, thank you. Overall, I think this list is really great. It's a great menu of options to look over. Certainly very ambitious in many areas, which I think is great. One thing I wanted to add about with first contact with the system is I know right now the focus is between, say, a police officer and person who's arrested, but I want to elevate an issue that relates to this here from my district is with those involved in officer-involved shootings. Often their family members or people close to them are taken in and almost treated like suspects. They're interrogated, or they're withheld from seeing their family member who was probably shot by police. So that's also a contact with the system, and I think it's related, but I don't know if it fits in as neatly, but I would like to see that aspect also involved in it if possible. That's it.
Yeah, I think that that's worth looking at. I've done some research in that area, and the law is extraordinarily, well, it's all judge made, first of all, which is perhaps, makes it all a good area for us to look at and recommend to the legislature, because I don't think that judges and the judges here can weigh in on this, really intended to sort of drive the policy on officer involved shootings, stand your ground type laws. So I think that is also right for our committee to look at. So I hear that. Listen, okay, so unless other people have thoughts, go
I don't
ahead.
know if Assembly Member Lee, he may have put his hand back up. That may have been a misfire. I don't know if he had anything else.
All right, good. You're done.
Maybe not. Okay.
So here's the deal. As I guess we started off saying that these are incredibly broad umbrellas. They will get narrowed down as we approach the dates. The more interests that you all have in these various issues, please funnel them to me and Tom so we can narrow our thinking. This is basically the order that we're anticipating them rolling out for the time being. I think almost everything that we've mentioned today could be included in one of these ideas. So I guess hopefully that the conversation can continue, especially if issues are particularly important to you. Obviously, we've taken notes about what you've said today, but just to keep us as we narrow towards when we have those meetings. And then of course, after the meeting, that's another opportunity for us to say, hey, we heard about X, but it didn't really quite hit what we were thinking about. Can we do more research on it? And that's, staff has always worked that way. This is pretty much to give us a framework going forward. With that said, do people have any thoughts or concerns at this point? Tom, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I just there's a lot, as always, for us to look at, and we'll take all this back and refine it and hone it and find the best folks to speak on these topics and bring them forward. But as Mike said, please stay in touch with me or other staff as you think of more stuff or have questions.
And I want to also especially reiterate what Justice Moreno said, is that we want to make recommendations that are genuine recommendations that we hope will pass the legislature, as opposed to being just sort of broad platitudes about the justice system. We've had, I think, good success rate so far, and to keep on moving in that directions. So although these are broad topics, we are definitely, the end goal is in December to have, as what we've done in the past, 6 to 12, really concrete ideas that the legislature can run with. That's the ultimate goal. Okay. So I'm going to take it that this is our tentative agenda, all subject to change. Please be in touch with.
Right.
Yes.
Our tentative agenda with consideration of the things we've suggested that may be added.
Yes, not added as individual sessions, but put it within the.
So I think there may be weight, and I think it needs to just be looked at a little more for one of those to be an individual session. So I can talk to staff in between and see whether there's any, whether that's relevant or not.
Sure. I agree, and whether or not they are an independent session or shoehorn into one of the broad topics that we have now, it's either is fine. We are also not 100% wedded to having meetings every other month. It's hard to put in more just on staff and logistics, but let's try to find a way. I think all of the ideas that we discussed today can be added to what we currently have, but we can certainly refine the topics, and we will along the way. We will. With that said, I think we've reached now the time for public comment. To get in line and comment, as always, please select the raise hand function in Zoom. If you're calling in, hit *9. Please note, of course, that this meeting is being recorded If you make a public comment, your name and phone number may be displayed as part of the recording. So if you'd like to comment, please raise your hand now. We'll take a minute to see how many people want to comment. Please keep your comments limited to the discussion of today's meeting. We'll note that the committee also accepts public comment in writing. In fact, that's often the most effective way to interact with us on a substantive matter. And that comment can be emailed to committee staff who emails our committee webpage, particularly Tom. And with that, let's see how many people have lined up.
Looks like we have about 5.
Okay. I'll give everybody 1 or 2 more minutes. 6. Okay, if people could keep their comments to 1 minute, I think that would be helpful. And Tom, would you mind calling people in?
First up is Crispy.
Hi, Crispy. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Thank you for that fabulous report and all the hard work that you, your staff, the panelists and researchers have done for this work to try to correct the penal code. I feel like we're, again, living with contradiction. I hope that we can solve some of that. I'm also a survivor of multiple crimes, so I'm very happy to see that victims' rights is #1 over there. I wanted to reiterate, there's another COVID outbreak, that's horrendous right now. 246 have died thus far. We have 5,600 people in custody with COVID, and we have staff as well with COVID, thousands of staff with COVID. And again, the contradiction here is that our governor needs to release people. He needs to mandate the vaccination of staff, which he is actually fighting against, which contradicts everything that he's saying about everybody else. I wanted to bring up that we should also add automatic retroactivity of all bills in the interest of justice. There's enough in our budget. There's a $34 billion surplus right now. I want to uplift no ICE transfers from prisons. I want to uplift data tracking on reform bills to ensure the follow through. And use that California Policy Labs and all of these researchers to make sure that after we pass all this legislation, that stuff is actually happening and people are being released as they should. And I would hope that you could fill the open position on this committee with a system impacted person. There are so many people in the community-based organizations who would be qualified, and I know that they have to be approved. This isn't something that you can do, it's the governor has to do this, but I would hope that you could help promote impacted people to be on this committee. I thank you very much. And I think this is going to be another promising year with this committee.
Thank you very much, Crispy. Let me just respond quickly and say that I totally empathize and understand. I've been watching the COVID concerns and crisis going on in prisons and jails. I believe that our legislation that just became effective in January 1st about giving the CDC recommendations on health and meritorious conduct releases will help expedite any crisis. And I have great faith actually in our Secretary of Corrections. And as you probably know, she's a nurse and takes these things extraordinarily seriously. Data tracking, I think, the reforms that we've recommended, just the first ones became law just 3 weeks ago. I do think that we should track them as best we can. And I would like to report back. I was going to mention to that. And I also think that the concept of retroactive application of new laws makes a ton of sense. So thank you.
All right, next up is Marion Wickard.
Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I swear I need a nurse here when I talk to you guys. My heart beats so fast. I'm like, wow. Anyways, I would like to thank all of you for your continued work towards changing our justice system. Without you, we would still be living like we did 20, 30 years ago. I fully support the automatic retroactivity of the changes to the penal code. And that's really, really important. There are 45 members of the San Quentin 1,000 Mile Running Club who have been released in the last couple of years. Out of those 45 people, not one has reoffended. This shows you that all these programs, athletic and self-help groups, are really working. I have a lot more to say as always, but my heart's beating so fast. I'm just going to say thank you for everything. Keep up the great work, and I'll see you next month. Thank you for everything.
Thank you for coming. I know that you're one of our loyal listeners, and we do really appreciate your continued participation and encouragement. And, we're hopefully making progress slowly but surely. Thank you.
Next up is Rebecca Weicker.
Hi, thank you again for the opportunity. I'm glad to see that victims' rights are on the agenda. Just for language, I'd love to see that termed victim and survivor rights and needs, because I think there are needs rather than rights also that we need to be taking care of. And in that vein, thinking about, and we will have the opportunity actually to meet with some of your committee in January. I'm grateful for that. But really thinking about how survivor needs are integrated into all the reform that we're doing, so that it's not seen as something in opposition, but in addition to. So I'd really love to see that. And I just finally, having had my own experience recently with end of life issues in my family, I've been thinking a lot about the prison system and what a poor job we do with that. And just thinking about how we can better care for families who have loved ones who are passing away within prisons. So just putting that out there. I don't know when or how, but just thinking about that, how we can be more humane in end of life notifications and connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weicker. I want to say that I'm glad that we're taking on the issue of victims' needs. I think that is a better framing. And that we've had very encouraging and I think positive conversations with as Tom mentioned, the president of the California Prosecutors Association, and with, although a slightly different constituency, with the Retailers Association. I think that these are, important issues that we can contribute to. Our overall mission has always been to improve public safety and reduce unnecessary incarceration at the same time. And I think that we can find common ground. There's more common ground than people perhaps anticipate. So that's our goal.
Next up is Irma Cooper.
Good morning. First, I want to also thank you for the hard work you have done and put emphasis on our criminal justice system. But I just want to add that I would like to see the parole board as one of the topics. The parole board, it seems nothing is consistent. It always depends on the parole officer. And plus, their denial rate is so high, and that really concerns me. My second point is about the COVID within the prisons, outbreak after outbreak. My loved one is at Centinela State Prison, and the guards are not being required to receive any vaccination, but and these outbreaks continue to happen. And then the third point is the release of high risk nonviolent inmates. It just seems to not be happening very often. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, even though I and others in our association have applied. We just don't even get a response back. Thank you, and I appreciate your consistency on our criminal justice system.
Thank you. Let me just address the parole issue, because I want to make sure that it doesn't slip, and I don't want Senator Skinner to keep. I want to make sure that she. What I'm trying to say is that she and I, in particular, but I think this whole committee have been focused on parole since certainly I was first approached by the governor about this. I think it is an area that we have been working on since day one. Our reports both of our prior reports have really gone into this. We have legislation that we're suggesting for this current cycle. The reason why it's not specifically on this agenda for this year is because we spent so much time and attention to it. But I assure you that we are all aware of the problems, aware of the inconsistencies. Jennifer Schaefer's come and testified before the committee multiple times, and we really do appreciate her time. But we also appreciate, I think, that there is a great deal of confusion, inconsistency, and problems with the California's parole system, which now, as we've mentioned, controls the fate of over half the people in CDCR custody. So it's an enormous issue, and we think it'd be vastly improved. Again, within our wheelhouse, it encourages rehabilitation, it rewards people who no longer threats to public safety, and it reduces incarceration all at the same time. So I promise you that it is very high on our minds, even if it's not on this year's specific agenda.
Yolanda Navarrete is next.
Hello, everybody. I have the virus right now, so I hope I can get through this really quickly. First off, I want to thank you all for doing such an amazing job last year, and I look forward to the great work that you're going to do this year. I'm Yolanda Navarrete. I am a crime victim survivor, and I'm also an advocate because I am personally impacted with my husband serving an LWOP sentence that's cost the state over $2.7 million for 28 years. He's been sober 26 years. So anyways, what I want to say is we're in a time where we're correcting the historical wrongs that have been happening. You know, statues are changing, names of parks are changing. So why are we having such difficulty changing CDCR rules in the penal code? Why do we have to take out retroactivity? Because the Senate House doesn't want it. Why do we have to go through court hearings after court hearings? Because the DA is blocking it. It's time for change, and we need to do it now because these are our children and my 13 grandchildren. I don't want them to get caught up in this net, and we need to address the DAs and how they handle things. We need them to hold all the pieces of the puzzle out and do the right thing, not just for their political career, but for human beings. And with that, I will return my time. Thank you, because I'm going to start coughing.
Well, I hope you feel better, first of all. Second, I think that we share some of your frustration. It's an extraordinary, complicated system with thousands, literally, of laws and judicial opinions that control the system. And we're doing our best to find those areas that have the broadest impact, that are realistically feasible in terms of reform in California. We've made great progress in California over the past several years, the past decade, in terms of reducing incarceration and improving crime rates at the same time. We want to keep that up and accelerate that. I agree that I'm optimistic that we will be able to continue our reform and hopefully accelerate in the years ahead. So,
Right.
And then lastly,
And Ms. Navarrete, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Next up is Desiree Andrea.
hello, Desiree. If we can't hear you, I don't know if you're talking.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
There you go.
Good morning, everyone. So I just had like a few suggestions. I am system impacted. My loved one's been incarcerated for 17 and one for 20 years. So I've been doing research on a global point. And one of my suggestions is, if we're not doing it already, to collect and use data to inform a rational, humane, and cost-effective use of the prison. Reducing overcrowding requires an understanding of the extent of the problem and the reason for which it has come. And in a particular prison system, a census of the prison population can identify who's in prison and why, and point to the priorities of relieving congestion. Timely and accurate information can also enable a more rational debate about the more effective use of prison and assist advocacy on behalf of the policies which meet national standards. And I also have a 10-point plan for almost everything that you have all the points you want to reach. I have 10-point plans on almost every topic that you have there.
Okay.
And that's it. Thanks for your time.
So first of all, on the data, let me tell you, you are preaching to the choir. For the past 2 years, Tom and I in particular, and also Brian Hebert, have been spending an extraordinary amount of time collecting data. We believe that we have an unprecedented trove of data about California's legal system for multiple agencies. We're continuing to expand that. We are now in the process of collecting. It is.
It's a big process.
It's a big state. It's a big lift. The data doesn't speak to each other very well. But we are very glad that we think that we have our arms around a significant piece of it. And we're working with our partners at California Policy Lab to do exactly what you're talking about in terms of getting an atlas of exactly who is in prison and jail, for what, for how long, broken down by geography, race, age, recidivism risk, all of those issues, because we really do need to identify those areas. I really do think that the data is both should be available. All of this was in open court and open to the public. And it's a difficult process of collecting and analyzing it, which is what we're doing. It's taken longer than we had hoped, but I believe that at the end of the day, we will be as well positioned as anyone in the country to make sound data-based analyses and recommendations. So yeah. You're right up my alley on the data piece. And with the 10-point suggestions, please send them along to staff. That's by far the best way to get that to us. So
awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Feel better. Oh, you're okay.
Looks like we have one more person. G.
Hi, yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to speak because I'm tag teaming work. Thank you all for your amazing work. And of course, the recent report on the death penalty, I bow to you repeatedly. And for including friends of mine in the report as well, Jarvis J. Masters and Kevin Cooper, two men with incredibly compelling cases of innocence. So my colleague Donna Doolin Larson is unable to speak today, and we're going to write you a more detailed email soon about Prop 66. We just want to make sure that the involuntary transfers that will be coming up for folks on death row are going to be closely followed. There's a bunch of issues. I'm going to let her speak to that because I'm not exactly sure all the bullet points. I am going to regurgitate one of my comments I've been asking for is for the committee to please work on solitary confinement and it's a torture. You know, I'm an Amnesty International coordinator here, and I really encourage you to do some solid study and work and revisions on solitary confinement in this state. Appreciate all of Skinner's input on mental health and all of the comments of the amazing people who are continuously speaking at these hearings. And I will miss Professor Ochen's amazing input. She was, wow, glad she's with the AG. So that's a mouthful. Many other comments, drop LWAP, et cetera, et cetera. Just appreciate you all so much. And I was able to get my little voice in here. So thank you.
Thank you, G. It's always good to hear from you. Solitary confinement is an incredibly important issue for me. I think that we may be able to think about it in particular relating to with regard to the mental health aspect. I think if my recollection is correct, about half of the people who are in some sort of segregated or solitary confinement, at least in CDCR, are also suffering, within the mental health delivery system. So that may be a way for us to think about it this year. But I agree, it's an incredibly important topic. And there has been important reform progress in other states, particularly in New York, that I think that may be models for us going forward. So.
And you know what, if it causes mental health problems. So,
right.
And the other thing I just want to throw in there is food and the health, sorry, I know, I promise, get me off of here. But the food situation is so appalling. You go in and try to even have a visit and it is diabetes, it is high blood pressure. You're like, okay, what do I, and this is the ultimate food in the vending machines. They are terrible. The whole system is just geared to cause disease and horror. So
I've been in those waiting rooms many times. I know exactly what you're talking about. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. All the people who are calling in from the public, our committee members, it is good to see you. I look forward to another productive year, both with our committee as we study topics over this year. Please know that at the same time as we are discussing and researching and studying issues that we outlined today, that we are working with Senator Skinner and others in the legislature to make sure that our proposals from December become law through the legislature. So we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. We'll keep you posted. As always, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and or Tom or other staff, particularly if you have issues and specific items to be added to our agenda, and whether or not there should be included in one of the broad topics we discussed today, or perhaps as Senator Skinner suggested that we just that we added a different topic. We're open to it. I think we are committed to the victims issues for February, because we need to keep that on track, but the rest of the year is open for further discussion. And I assume things will change as we go along, but at least this gives us a roadmap for the time being. With that said, unless anybody else has anything else to add, I'll close the meeting. All right. Well, everybody, please have a good weekend. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch, and I'll see you all in February. Bye.